Welcome to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. Today we present design critic, author, and officer of the British Empire, Alice Rawsthorn. A big thank you to our partners for making today's event possible, Design Core Detroit, and D++ Design Salon, which is happening over the next few days, and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. I have just one announcement for you this evening of something, if you haven't seen it, you may not want to miss. This evening is the last evening to see Matangi Maya MIA here at the Michigan Theater at 7:15 and 9:45. This film was actually edited by a woman who grew up in Ann Arbor, Marina Katz. She graduated from the University of Michigan, and it's a film worth watching according to sold-out audiences at Sundance, the Berlin Film Festival, New York City, London, etc. So it's a hometown gal, a film that she's worked on, and it's about this critically acclaimed artist, MIA, and this chronicling her journey from refugee immigrant to pop star. So last chance to see it here tonight, 7:15. We will have our regular Q&A today in the screening room, so please join us there directly following the stage presentation. You can exit the theater doors, turn to the left down the hall, and you will, before the bathrooms, you'll find yourself in the lobby of the screening room theater, where Alice will be happy to meet you and answer your questions. In addition, we have Nicola's Books is in the lobby, and they have Alice's most recent title, Design as Attitude, for sale. And apparently, this is quite an opportunity for you this evening because the book is sold out in Europe. There are no copies available. They are available, however, here tonight at the Michigan Theater, and Alice will be happy to provide some signatures after the Q&A for those who wish. Don't miss next week. We have Master Bladesmith Bob Kramer. And please silence your cell phones now. For a proper introduction of our guest today, please welcome industrial designer and Stamp School assistant professor, Bruce Tharp.
Hello. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, design critic and author Alice Rawsthorn, easily one of the most influential and respected voices in contemporary design. After an art history degree from Cambridge University, she began writing for the Financial Times as a foreign correspondent, reporting on the creative industries, and continued to do that for about 15 years. It was in 2001 when I first became aware of Miss Rawsthorn, as she became director of the Design Museum London, bringing a new vision for the institution and holding that position until 2006. But it was probably her next role as design critic for the New York Times when her voice was most resonant for American design. For over a decade, she wrote clearly and critically, helping to raise the visibility and perception of American design to the rest of the world, but perhaps more importantly, to a broader American audience itself. Her first book, published in 1996, was an acclaimed biography of Yves Saint Laurent, and she's contributed essays and chapters on design and contemporary culture in over 25 other books since. Her own book in 2013, Hello World, Where Design Meets Life, delivers her historical perspective entwined with present analyses and future imaginings regarding the impacts of design and culture. Her most recent book, published earlier this year, Design as Attitude, again points to the future of design, acknowledging our social, political, and ecological challenges today. And we'll hear more about that tonight. She's an honorary senior fellow of the Royal College of Art with an honorary doctorate from the University of the Arts. She was a trustee of the Arts Council England, the chair of the British Council Design Advisory Group, a former member of the Design Council, and a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Design. She's a chair and board of trustees. She's a chair of the board of trustees at several arts institutions and organizations, and has been awarded an OBE, Officer of the Order of the British Empire, for her service to design and the arts. She keeps a packed speaking schedule. For example, a few days after she leaves us, she'll be at the Triennale in Milan. A few days after that, to Istanbul, the Design Biennial. then back to London to the Tate Modern, and then the Sir John Sloan Museum after that, and then back to the US again for the MoMA in New York, all within a month or so. So we're incredibly fortunate to have her as one of the stops tonight. So please welcome me and warmly welcoming the design critic of our era, Alice Rawsthorn.
That was nearly as big a round of applause as the plan to legalize marijuana, so thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be here to speak at such an important lecture series. The list of previous speakers is really wonderful. I only wish I'd had the chance to hear them, and not a little daunting. So I am here to talk about the themes of my new book, Design as an Attitude. And I'm going to begin by talking about the inspiration for the book, one of my design heroes. And you will doubtless recognize him. I have many heroines, of course, but also have heroes in the interests of fairness and equality. And one is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. Now, there are many, many reasons to love this man. I mean, he was absolutely irresistible. He was a Hungarian emigre who wore this factory worker's boiler suit to signify his faith in the power of industry and technology to build a better world, while he was teaching at the Bauhaus in Germany. And when he was there, he not only steered the Bauhaus towards modernism, but allowed women to study whatever they wished, including subjects previously reserved for men. And who wouldn't admire his courage after he arrived here in the United States when he welcomed African American students and teachers to his new Chicago design school at a time when the city's education system was largely segregated? Because wherever he was, and regardless of his personal circumstances, Moholy-Nagy remained optimistic, generous, subversive, curious, and committed to experimentation, whether it was pioneering the then new media of film and photography or investigating their impact on visual culture and daily life. But for me, one of his most important contributions was to reinvent the concept of design, because he was largely responsible for liberating it from the constraints of the professional role it had occupied since the Industrial Revolution and redefining it as an improvisational medium that was rooted in instinct, ingenuity, resourcefulness, and was open to everyone. In his book, published in 1947, Vision in Motion. Now, Moholy-Nagy was dying of leukemia when he wrote the book, but he was so determined to finish it that he urged his wife Sybil to bring his photographs, drawing, and notes to the hospital so he could work on it between treatments. He died in November 1946, and Vision in Motion was published the following year. And it presented an eclectic and empowering vision of design, which he summed up in chapter 2 with the words, "Designing is not a profession, but an attitude." And I've always loved that phrase, quaint though the word designing means to us now. And I've always admired Moholy-Nagy's conviction that design should be transformed, as he wrote, from the notion of a specialist function into a generally valid attitude of resourcefulness and inventiveness. And his vision of design was rooted in his commitment to the constructivist movement, which he'd encountered as a young artist in Budapest after World War I. Because design was central to the work of the original constructivists, the group of avant-garde Russian artists who included Alexander Rodchenko, who you can see here with his wife Varvara Stepanova, and their friends El Lissitzky and Lyubov Popova. Now, they believed that artists, designers, and scientists should collaborate with industry to build a fairer, more progressive society by creating new things for the new life, as Popova put it. And this was the vision of design that Moholy-Nagy introduced to the Bauhaus after his arrival there in the mid-1920s, and then to the new design schools he founded in Chicago after fleeing Nazi Germany to the United States. And I chose the phrase design as an attitude as the title of my new book, both as a tribute to Moelinage and because I believe that his concept of design as an attitudinal discipline steeped in experimentation is a defining force in design today, when a new generation of designers, professional and otherwise, are seizing their chance to work independently in pursuit of their own social, political, and environmental goals. But before I explain what I mean by attitudinal design in a contemporary sense, I should begin by describing what I believe design in general to be. Because design is a complex and elusive phenomenon that's adopted many different guises at different times and in different contexts, leaving it prone to muddles, misunderstandings, and cliches. Yet in all of its manifold roles, design has always had one elemental one, and I believe that's as this. It's as an agent of change that can help to interpret changes of any type, whether they're social, political, economic, scientific, technological, cultural, ecological, or whatever, to ensure that they will affect us positively rather than negatively. And design, of course, did that for centuries, millennia in fact, long before a word was invented to describe it. Because whenever human beings have sought to change their lives, whether by fabricating new objects or structures, or moderating their own behavior or other people's, they've engaged with design, but did so originally intuitively and almost always unknowingly. Prehistoric men and women acted as designers on the necessity as the mother of invention principle when they sharpened sticks, stones, and animal bones to use as weapons and tools, and when they molded clay into vessels to eat or drink from. And many other enduring design feats have been equally instinctive. Take this. This is one of the most brilliant examples of communication design. It is, of course, the raised fist, which has been recognized as a sign of strength and unity in the face of adversity for over 3,000 years since its adoption in ancient Assyria. And the same gesture has since been chosen as the symbol of a succession of political activists, from the Russian revolutionaries to campaigners for workers' rights to the Black Power and women's movements in the 1960s and 70s, and more recently by Black Lives Matter activists like these. And it's an absolutely brilliant symbol because the physical process of raising and clenching your fist really does make you feel stronger because blood courses down your arm so you feel powerful enough to stand up for what you believe in and to take up anyone. And another ancient symbol, the white flag, has proved equally enduring. It was officially acknowledged as a symbol of surrender in the late 19th century, but it has been used for that purpose for more than 2,000 years by the Eastern Han Dynasty in China onwards. Nor has design ever lost its prehistoric necessity as the mother of invention role as a useful tool for resourceful people in challenging circumstances. Take these improbable designers, the early 18th century pirates who terrorized the high seas and started to fly a flag that you can see in the top right-hand corner of the screen of a human skull and a pair of crossed bones as an emblem of dread in an attempt to terrify the ships they attacked into surrendering on sight, thereby avoiding costly casualties and wasted ammunition. Another example of design being used equally instinctively, but to very, very different ends, is the work of the 19th century British healthcare reformer Florence Nightingale. She volunteered to work in military clinics in Turkey during the Crimean War and was horrified to discover, once she got there, that more of the patients were dying of infections they caught in the filthy, fetid wards than from their battle wounds. So she decided to do something about it. She drew on the research of a doctor and social reformer working in Manchester, John Roberton, who was designing and building model hospitals and convalescent homes with cleanliness and safety in mind. So Florence Nightingale adapted his design principles for military use and lobbied for funding to implement them, becoming an unwitting pioneer of information design during that process, because she drew pie charts, which were very newfangled inventions at the time, like this one, in order to communicate her very complex arguments as clearly and accurately as possible to the British government. And of course, it was an incredibly successful example of information design, and they gave her the funding she needed, first for military hospitals and then for civilian ones. But by then, by the late 19th century, the design process was seen in a very different light, because it was being applied knowingly and systematically to manufacture large quantities of goods of consistent quality at affordable prices. And the practice of design was formalized with the introduction of training programs, specialist design schools, and clearly defined methodologies. Design became professionalized in this new industrial guise, but it was also restricted to a commercial role, generally executed under instruction from someone else. And this, of course, has been the conventional perception of design ever since. But I believe this was also the beginning of design's diminution, because although industrial design achieved extraordinary things, it also had huge drawbacks, as we now know today. And I believe that design's limitation to this commercial role was the beginning of its stereotyping as a promotional or styling tool that was concerned with surface appearances rather than substance. Now, there were always exceptions to this, like Laszlo Molinage himself and fellow constructivists, and another was this character. Actually, if my remote worked, which it isn't. Sorry, could one of the technicians move to the next slide, please? And if you have a new remote, bring it on stage. Obviously a design flaw. I will try. Well, actually, I can probably do it. Oh, it's actually because of the computers. That should do it. Perfect. Thank you very much. Right, so here is, of course, the wonderful Richard Buckminster Fuller, the maverick US designer, engineer, and activist. Now, he campaigned against the environmental damage caused by industrialization as early as the 1920s and devoted his working life to trying to stop it, urging younger designers to do the same, which sadly, relatively few of them did. But design was, of course, also deployed as a form of political protest. So one of my favorite examples is this. This is what was called the Atelier Populaire, and during the May 1968 student riots in Paris, a group of designers and artists occupied the École des Beaux-Arts on the left bank and literally took over the print shop there to produce hundreds of posters as what they called weapons in the service of the struggle. And another cause benefited from the resourcefulness of the anonymous members of the Grand Fury movement, a collective of artists and designers who designed banners, billboards like these, T-shirts and stickers to raise awareness of AIDS worldwide during the 80s and 90s. Grand Fury also sought to redress misconceptions about AIDS with courage and wit, as in their slogan, "Kissing doesn't kill, but greed and indifference do," which was literally plastered across buses all over New York City. But inspiring though such projects are, attitudinal design was very much on the margins of design culture throughout the 20th century, though that has changed dramatically, as it has experienced a radical transformation into the fluid, expansive, and open-minded medium described by Molinage. The chief catalyst, apart from the determination and ingenuity of the individuals involved, is the plethora of digital tools that have transformed the practice and possibilities of design. Now, most of these tools are very familiar, they're fairly basic and inexpensive, but if imaginatively applied, have proved remarkably useful in helping designers to operate independently and thereby liberate themselves. The availability of crowdfunding platforms, of course, now helps designers to raise substantial sums of money, as does the possibility of securing grants from the growing number of charitable foundations that will support social and humanitarian design projects like Acumen, the Gates Foundation, and the Kendada Fund. And to put this in context, one of the boldest attitudinal design projects of our time, this one, the Ocean Cleanup, a Dutch non-profit, which was founded by a young Dutch design engineer, Boyan Slat, 4 years ago when he was still a student, to develop a way of clearing plastic trash from our oceans, has raised over $30 million from crowdfunding and grants. Designers are also able to manage huge quantities of complex data on affordable computers and to use social media to raise awareness of their work in order to flush out collaborators, suppliers, and fabricators, and to clinch funding or generate media coverage. Now, individually, any of these changes would have had a positive impact on design culture, just as they have in many other sectors, but collectively, they've proved transformational. And that's just as well because we urgently need design's power as an agent of change at an extraordinarily turbulent time when we face challenges on so many fronts. I mean, this is a terrifying situation for all of us, which was summed up brilliantly by one of my favorite banners at the Women's March on London earlier this year, and it's this one, "Too much to fit on one sign." So here are just a few of the challenges that they could have squeezed on there if only there'd been room. Climate change, obviously, and its dire political, economic, and environmental consequences as parts of Africa face the worst famines in their history. The growing imbalance of wealth between rich and poor, old and young, the growing distrust of the political establishment. You've just heard one of your fellow students urging you all to vote. And what happens if you don't? The rise of intolerance, prejudice, and bigotry will continue. The backlash against Brexit and Donald Trump, and the crisis of social justice. Ever more terrifying terrorist and cyber attacks and killer sprees, and the deepening environmental crisis as tens of millions of people, a historically unprecedented number, are forced to flee their homes and to struggle to rebuild their lives. These are all the changes that designers now could and should be tackling. And of course, there are accelerating advances in technology, because after a decade in which technologies that would have once seemed like sci-fi movie props have become part of our daily lives, we now need design to help us to identify constructive uses for neuromorphic and quantum computing, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, and all the other innovations that we know will be part of our lives in the near future. But equally urgently, we need design to help us to avoid their dangers. Because identifying useful applications for seemingly inscrutable technologies was one of design's core roles in the industrial age, but it's taken on a new urgency given the power of the next wave of advances and their potential to wreak damage. Witness the current paranoia and flood of scare stories about AI. Now, design isn't a panacea for any of these major problems, as The Economist calls them, but it can help us to address them intelligently, responsibly, and constructively. And the new attitudinal designers are already grappling with these challenges and many more. There are lots of exciting examples of their work in Design as an Attitude, but here are just a few of them. So I'm going to start with the amply funded Ocean Cleanup, which was founded 4 years ago by this guy. You can see him in the middle of the slide, Boyan Slat. He's sort of standing there like a reverential speaker or a rap star. And this was actually the announcement in the Netherlands when he announced that the Ocean Cleanup was ready to start live tests in the Pacific. So you can see the kind of acclaim and public attention that his project has aroused. Now, he coined the idea in 2013 after he found more plastic bags in the ocean than fish when he was on a diving holiday in Greece. And his vision is to design the world's largest floating structure to collect, contain, and clear plastic trash from the huge garbage patches that have appeared in the Pacific, and then to take it onto dry land where it can be recycled responsibly. Now, this is a proposal to tackle one of the biggest pollution problems of our time, so it's a genuinely worthwhile cause, but his plans have come under fierce criticism from scientists who claim they won't work and environmentalists who claim that they risk damaging marine life. Yet because he raised so much money from crowdfunding, that $30 million, Boy and Slat prevailed. He continued to complete the design, prototyping and testing of the system, which did go live in the Pacific last month. A very different way of using design to combat climate change is ore streams, and this is an ongoing design research project executed by two Italian designers, Andrea Tremarche and Simone Farasin of Studio Forma Fantasma, to chart the gigantic, often illicit, global trade in electronic and digital waste that's responsible for the emergence of gigantic digital graveyards like this, and this is the notorious Abgogloshi dump near Accra in Ghana, where so many of the unwanted digital devices and computers we use in the West go to fail to die. Now, as well as documenting the shipment of waste from country to country, Andrea and Simone have collaborated on ore streams with scientists, environmentalists, manufacturers, and even Interpol to assess its social and economic impact, as well as the environmental damage it causes. They've also identified practical ways in which designers and manufacturers can ensure that their products will be easier to recycle responsibly. So, for example, they'd advised against using black rubber to cover potentially valuable and recyclable copper wire, because the color black can't be detected by the optical sensors in recycling plants, so all of that copper wire is sent to landfill. And to put the digital waste problem in context, currently fewer than a third of all the digital devices discarded in the European Union every year are responsibly recycled. I don't know the statistics for the United States, but I imagine it's fairly similar. Now, another focus for attitudinal design is the refugee crisis, as designers have risen to the challenge both of providing emergency support for the record numbers of people who've been forced to leave their homes for fear of conflict or repression, and helping them to settle into new communities. So an example is this project, which is called Talking Hands. It was founded last year in Treviso in northern Italy by a graphic designer, Fabrizio Uratini, whose objective was to enable some of the hundreds of migrants and asylum seekers who'd literally been dumped in a hostel in Treviso by the Italian government. He wanted to help them to use their time productively by learning new skills, because not only had they been dumped in this horrific hostel in very squalid conditions, they weren't legally allowed to work, and they literally had nothing to occupy their time. Now, around 50 young male refugees like these guys living temporarily in the area now go to regular craft classes run by designer volunteers from Treviso and nearby Venice, where they learn new skills and enhance existing ones, like carpentry and embroidery. So, like these guys, they make products to be sold at local fairs and markets, and also generate additional income by repairing and restoring furniture for local people. So not only does the project offer an opportunity for refugees and asylum seekers to learn useful skills and to improve their chances of employment, it enables them to use their time productively and to engage with the local community, which was once incredibly hostile towards all these people who had arrived there because of obviously stereotypical racist reasons. So because they've engaged with the Talking Hands volunteers, some of the local people, sadly not all, have changed their attitudes and dropped their stereotypes. And when the volunteers who are running Talking Hands learnt that the refugee and migrant communities were suffering from a severe food shortage last Christmas because the government's supply of food wouldn't be forthcoming, they opened a food bank and asked local people for donations. The response was phenomenal, suggesting that Talking Hands' diplomatic initiative was actually working. Now, another design team that's pursuing an equally important but very different response to the refugee crisis is Forensic Architecture. And this is a design research agency founded in London by the Israeli architect Eyal Weizman to identify and analyze data from diverse sources to uncover the truth about abuses of human rights relating to migration and also climate and war crimes. Forensic architecture works with coders, filmmakers, lawyers, archaeologists, scientists, and other specialists to reconstruct scenes of criminality or conflict. Its goal is to establish the truth about such atrocities as a devastating attack on a Syrian hospital and why more than 60 migrants were left to die when a boat drifted in the Mediterranean. The results have been used as evidence in official investigations, policy reviews, and legal cases in the hope of securing justice and preventing repetitions. And so compelling is its work that the group has been included in lots of arts projects in Europe, including Documenta, the 5-yearly art festival in Germany last year, and as a result of that exhibition, they've been nominated for Britain's biggest contemporary art award, the Turner Prize. Now, just as Moulinage urged designers to engage with other disciplines by forging collaborations with specialists from those fields, he also envisaged the reverse happening, and for those people to experiment directly with design, as the collaborators of Forensic Architecture and Forma Phantasma are doing. Now, another example of this is the British social scientist Hilary Cotton, who became convinced of design's usefulness in addressing complex social and economic issues like homelessness when she was running water projects for the World Bank in Africa, and realized that the quality of their design was absolutely critical in determining their success or failure. Now, like most British intellectuals, Hilary knew nothing about design, or thought she didn't, but she was so intrigued by it that she started to investigate and also to look into whether it could provide useful solutions for other social and political problems that preoccupied her. So once she was back in Britain, she founded Participle as a social enterprise whose mission was to reinvent the welfare state by designing new solutions for acute social problems like aging, homelessness, isolation, and unemployment. One of its projects involved designing a new system for caring for the elderly residents in an economically deprived borough of London. Participle did this by forming local circles that functioned as a sort of combination of a concierge service, a self-help group, and a social club for seniors. The circles have since been introduced to a dozen other boroughs throughout the UK. Now, traditionally, a designer's role in tackling societal problems like that would have been limited to producing brochures or websites explaining what social scientists, politicians, and economists had decided to do. But Hilary felt that they had much more to contribute to the process. So she has embedded designers in decision-making for all her projects by assembling cross-disciplinary teams of relevant specialists, all of which are led by a designer that use design language throughout and adhere to the design process, because she believes that's a better way of getting a really imaginative solution to problems like homelessness, long-term unemployment, and so on, that will actually be fit for purpose. And Participle closed last year after a decade of experiments, but its projects like the Circles for the Elderly continue to be run by the local communities and continue to influence the work of other social design groups worldwide. An equally ingenious example of attitudinal design from ingenue designers is Sahad Kahani, which is a project that seeks to improve the quality and provision of healthcare for women in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan suffers from a severe shortage of women doctors, even though more women study medicine at university and medical school than men. This is because once they graduate, they come under such acute social and family pressure to marry, have children, and give up work that there are far too few female doctors to care for the large number of women in Pakistan who'd prefer not to be treated by men. So two Pakistani doctors, Sahad Kahani and Ifat Zafar, decided to find a solution, and they used their instinctive design flair to address the problem by developing a network of teleclinics that would enable female doctors like them to work from home by examining patients on live video links, like the one you can see on the laptop on the screen. They then liaise with local nurses on the patient's treatment. And the doctors are talking to the patients by live video links from their homes. The patients are accompanied in local clinics that have been opened throughout Pakistan, in villages, towns, and smaller cities, by a local nurse who'll supervise their treatment and also liaise with the doctors if there are any problems. Now, the concept of Sahad Kahani was tested in Karachi, the Pakistani capital, 4 years ago, and predictably it encountered lots of problems. One was the inadequacy of the power supply in remote rural areas, and another was that many of the patients simply failed to believe or refused to believe that the women they were talking to on the screen really were qualified to treat them. But solutions were found, and the network is now being expanded throughout Pakistan. And indeed, the principal beneficiaries of attitudinal design may well turn out to be the populations of remote rural areas of developing countries like Pakistan that rarely benefited from conventional design practice in the past, but arguably need it the most. Because some of the most exciting breakthroughs in the design, for example, of interconnected Internet of Things technologies have been in African countries where more people have access to cell phones than to clean running water, thereby enabling ingenious design projects to dramatically expand access to sorely needed services. And an example is this. This is Peak Retina. It's a smartphone adapter that was developed by a group of doctors and designers called Peak Vision in Kenya to enable eye problems like cataracts and glaucoma to be diagnosed remotely. Health workers in isolated rural areas can test patients' eyes at local clinics using the device. They then send data for analysis on it on a cellular connection to well-equipped hospitals, which are often hundreds of miles away. The specialists in those hospitals then decide whether treatment is required, saving the patients from making long, expensive, possibly pointless journeys, and making it far likelier that they'll have regular eye tests, so that when problems like cataracts and glaucoma develop, they can be spotted swiftly and treated promptly. And other diagnostic devices have been designed to improve the treatment of other health issues, including heart conditions. And collectively, innovations like this, including the expansion of telemedicine, should have a huge impact on the quality of local healthcare in the most remote, economically deprived areas of the world, where historically it's been dangerously inadequate. Now, design, of course, hasn't traditionally been seen as an obvious solution to dysfunctional social services, healthcare shortages, plastic pollution, or to seeking social justice. People have, unfortunately, been far likelier to see it as something that produces snazzy cell phones, blingy trainers, and overpriced hoodies. But there is, of course, much, much more to it than that. Nor have people typically expected independent designers to be able to raise over $30 million to mount epic ecological ventures on the scale of the ocean cleanup, or doctors like Sahad Kahani and Ifat Zafar to recognize that design has a critical value in their work. Even now, more people are likelier to perceive design as a styling device or as a reason why so much plastic trash is poisoning our oceans than as a means of cleaning it away. But if Laszlo Molinage's ambitious and eclectic vision of design is to be realized, those cliches have to be squashed. The only way that design, attitudinal and otherwise, will manage to do this is by proving its worth in its new terrain. Because if it doesn't, if attitudinal design doesn't work, why would politicians, bureaucrats, and NGOs consider it to be capable of helping the victims of war crimes to secure justice or to develop more efficient global systems of managing waste? Now, I believe that design is one of our most powerful tools to address all of those challenges in collaboration with other disciplines, but only if it is deployed intelligently, sensitively, and with extreme care and precision. Otherwise, how can design expect to win the public confidence and political support it needs to be empowered to play a more prominent and powerful role in our lives? It won't. That will only happen if there are fundamental changes in design practice. Now, one of them is interpreting design in its broadest strategic sense as a process of change management and a series of skills that can be applied in different contexts to address the major problems I've talked about. Another is becoming more compassionate. Design in the industrial age and the modernist era tended to be defined by certainties, which made it plucky and optimistic, but also prone to arrogance. Empathy and modesty will be essential to design in future. Designers must also become increasingly generous and genuinely open-minded in forging true collaborations with experts from other disciplines and making the most of those collaborations as learning opportunities rather than simply an opportunity to expand into new terrain and bag new business from there. It must also do the same to the people who'll use design and will play increasingly important roles in the design process in future. And obviously, we're already seeing this thanks to the emergence of digital fabrication systems like 3D printing, and this can only accelerate in the future. But the design community needs to change too. It has to become more diverse and inclusive. If you believe in design and its value for society, it stands to reason that we need the best possible designers, and we're not going to get them if they continue to be drawn from a very narrow social group. In other words, if they're the white cis males who fill design history books and design exhibitions and have traditionally dominated the design profession, many of them will continue to be brilliant designers, but we need other people, other voices, people with other heritages to become designers too. And finally, the design community needs to accept that as designers and design projects become increasingly ambitious, the consequences of failure will escalate. Because just as every thoughtfully planned and executed attitudinal design project represents a step forward, every sloppily designed flop, and unfortunately there have always been lots of those in the past, and there will continue to be them in future, all of those flops will increase the consequences of failure and be a setback for everyone else. Now, the ocean cleanup may well prove to be a very important test case in this now that it's live in the Pacific. Because if it fails, it will be considerably harder, not only for Boyan Slat, its founder, but other digitally empowered design activists to secure financial and political backing in future. But conversely, their credibility will soar if the ocean cleanup succeeds in completing all or even part of what its website confidently describes as the largest cleanup in history. Either way, Boyan Slat and every other attitudinal designer would benefit immensely from the services of another of my favorite design endeavors, the immersive research conducted by the Dutch architect Jan Willem Petersen. Now, he founded a group called Specialist Operations, which is a design research agency based in Amsterdam. And its first project, which was completed 2 years ago, was to assess what was called Task Force Orisgan. And this was an extremely ambitious and extremely expensive Dutch government-funded post-conflict reconstruction program in Afghanistan. And here you can see some of the results of Task Force Erasgan. Because the Dutch government funded the construction of thousands of new homes, schools, clinics, roads, police stations, mosques, bridges, factories, even an airport in Erasgan, a desolate area of Afghanistan that was absolutely stricken after decades of warfare. Now, Jan Willem Petersen decided to find out whether the investment had been worthwhile and whether all the infrastructure that the Dutch government had funded was actually fit for purpose. And he spent months traveling around the region. He learnt local dialects so he could communicate from the people. He even grew a beard to make him look less conspicuous among local communities. Now, he discovered that all of the projects in the program had been designed and constructed with good intentions, yet his investigation concluded that only 20% of them were actually serving a useful purpose. 30% had serious flaws, and many of those had actually been abandoned completely. And 50%, that's half the project, were barely functional, largely because their Western designers had failed to take account of the local context. So an example befell a village in Erasgan that was stopped construction of a school after hearing that the Dutch had decided to build a school of their own, entirely unaware that the local community was planning to do this. The Dutch-funded building turned out to be so badly designed and built that it was unusable, and the village now has no school at all. Another problem was a police station that the Australian architects, who the Dutch government had commissioned to design it, insisted on building with a pitched roof. The local police chief explained painstakingly that this would make the police station basically inoperative because they needed a flat roof for surveillance purposes. Of course, the pitched roof not only was useless for that, it couldn't actually cope with the extremes of the local climate, so it had to be replaced, again, very expensively by a flat roof. Jan Willem Petersen published his findings in a 300-page report, which he presented to the Dutch government. The British government, of course, presented with such reports, certainly the current one would have probably ripped it up and thrown it away, but the Dutch government was more responsible and did take it seriously. Now, post-conflict reconstruction projects like this are hugely expensive, yet the results are seldom seen in the countries that pay for them. Most analyses of them are conducted by development economists or government auditors who are admirably equipped to identify errors in their own fields, but may miss the design flaws that can cause serious problems. Jan Willem Petersen used his design knowledge to spot them and to suggest ways of avoiding repetitions. Now, I believe that work like his could prove critical in assessing the efficacy of preventing yet more ambitious and expensive design debacle in future, and ensuring that the new genre of ambitious, independent, attitudinal designers will fulfill their true potential, just as Laszlo Molinage would have wished. So I'd like to thank you all very much. We're now moving to the small theatre, where I'll be very happy to answer questions and hope to see you there. Thank you.